Now, 5 years ago, African governments agreed to set up an African International Crimes Court. 5 years later, only 25 of the continent's 55 member states have signed the Malabo Protocol, which paves the way for the formation of the court.
We do engage with states from time to time when we meet with them during the AU summits. We talk to them. Of course, they'll promise that they are going to do it. But it's a long process, but we are still encouraging states to do that, because when we have universal ratification, when we have universal deposit of the declaration, it gives the court universal legitimacy, because it will mean that every citizen or everyone resident on the continent can access the court.
All right, so the idea is to have this Pan-African court to deal with a number of criminal issues across the continent. Well, to tell us a little bit more about this, we're now joined from our Pretoria studio by Dr. Dominique Meisters, who's a senior researcher at the South African SDG Hub at the University of Pretoria. Thanks so much for joining us. Welcome to the program. So I think let's start with the Malabo Protocol itself. What led to the signing of this, and what were they trying to do?
Well, thank you, Peter. There were quite a few different things that they were trying to do. The process in terms of it, they've got an African Court for Human Rights that exists and that functions. And then they've also got an African Court of Justice, which doesn't function. And they merged the two and they gave it criminal jurisdiction as well. But the idea goes further back. It goes back to when they were setting up the human rights system. It's an idea of Africa has particular crimes which are of concern. And is the international system able to address them or not? And that's part of the reason that we've got the Malabo Protocol. All
right, so the protocol is introduced at a summit to the AU in June 2014. But there's been this lethargy to sign it in the first instance and then get on to ratify it. I would even say that it was quicker for African states to sign up for the to become state parties of the ICC than it's been to set up their own court.
Yes. Well, for numerous reasons for this when we come to look at it. Partly, some states, when I was talking to a lot of state officials, they were saying, we don't understand how this court is going to work with the International Criminal Court. So there's some uncertainty there. There's also problems in terms of funding. We all know the African Union is heavily funded by external parties. One of these parties has gone to numerous African officials and made it very clear they will not fund this court. So you've got two different things, in my opinion, which are the main things which are at play. We can't afford the court. We're not sure how the court is going to work in terms of dealing with the international court. And then the other problem is we've already seen we don't have all African courts part of a human rights court. African states as part of the human rights court. So could we really have expected them to have jumped on board of an African criminal court? I'm not 100% sure.
Why is a court like this important in the first place?
One of the things for me, I think, is key when it comes to this court and distinguishes itself from the International Criminal Court. It's looking at more than just international crimes of genocide, crimes against humanity, war crimes, and aggression, which are important and definitely occur throughout Africa at different points in time. But it's starting to take a much more regional context approach. It's looking at underlying causes of conflict. We're looking at things like corruption, money laundering, trafficking in people, misappropriation of natural resources, unconstitutional changes of government. A lot of things which destabilize and lead to conflicts. So for me, I think this is key. We need to start looking at criminal prosecutions as one way of dealing with this.
So some people might say, but each country on the continent has domestic courts. Are they unable, or is it unwilling to prosecute some of these crimes?
That's probably a mixture of both. With some of these crimes, definitely, you're going to have cross-border cooperation because of the nature of the crimes. And maybe certain domestic courts do not have the exact laws in place to enable this, or even simple things like set up in terms of the cooperation with each other. So what this court also does is it helps. It adds another layer to it, or at least what it could do. You can have domestic prosecutions as well, and you can also have the continental prosecutions, and potentially at slightly higher level people. And also, it harmonizes laws amongst those countries who are part of it and within Africa. So we have a comprehensive approach to it.
All right, harmonization of laws. I think you've hit a sensitive nail there, because, you know, depending on the state of human rights in various countries, some countries just don't want to have to give certain liberties to their citizens.
I completely agree, and this is where I think international criminal law gets a bit of leeway. I mean, it's hard for any government to say, yes, we are totally okay with committing genocide, yes, we'll commit war crimes. So you've kind of taken away some of the contentiousness, I suppose. African states have all come out and said they don't agree with corruption. They don't agree with mercenarism. They, in theory, don't agree with unconstitutional changes of government. And for me, one of the key things about this court is it's based on legal treaties and instruments that African states have already signed up to in an international and also on a continental level. So on one hand, we've kind of got them to agree that it's not okay. So there's one half of the battle for me. That's kind of
All right. Do you think it will get off the ground? I mean, it just seems that there's so much in the way, and, you know, for as long as people aren't being pushed, they're not really wanting to run with this thing.
Personally, I always hope that we do get to the point where it does become a reality. I think we are not yet. I think there are certain aspects of this court which need to be strengthened. I think better engagement with African states, and, if I'm honest, civil society on the continent. It happened with the human rights courts. When you've got the people of the continent behind this and understanding it, then yes, I think there's more of a momentum. It's harder for governments to ignore this. But for me, there's also the key problem of, if we've got our funders saying no, well, if the money's not there, no one's going to do it.
All right, and then perhaps finally, is this a situation where, let's say, my domestic courts are not listening to my case, I've got a genuine case, would this be a court I could go to, much in the same way as somebody might say, the UK court has let me down, I'm going to go to the European courts and get a matter dealt with?
Well, I think firstly, we need to be clear that the criminal section of this court is not the same as the human rights section. The human rights section is a separate matter. But when it comes to the criminal side, it isn't going to be your everyday crime that we suffer from in South Africa, for example. That isn't going to be heard. But what can be heard, and what the prosecutor is, the powers he's enabled to do, is he can receive information from all sorts of sources. And based upon that, he can open investigation, or states can refer them, or other African states can refer. And we have seen that used with the International Criminal Court for slightly dubious reasons sometimes. But there's no reason to say this wouldn't happen. But we cannot expect it to implement domestic criminal law in the same way of how we understand it on a day-to-day basis.
All right. You know, Dominique, we're going to have to leave it there, but I think we're going to have a number of conversations, particularly around the law and our courts across the continent, just to continue educating our viewers about some of these important institutions, and perhaps give our leaderships a bit of a nudge. But thanks so much indeed for your time.
No, thank you very much, Peter.
All right, so that was Dominique Maestros, who's a senior researcher in the University of Pretoria SDG Hub in South Africa, talking to us about this criminal court that's being set up. It's got there's a few signatures from the Malabo Protocol, but it's taking its time to move. We'll keep a track on that for sure.